welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Together we leave behind the noise of the day and drift toward a quieter place, where history murmurs in the distance and time moves a little slower. It means a lot that you're here, allowing my voice to keep you company in this calm space before sleep. If you'd like to support this journey, a like, a comment, or a quiet subscription can help keep the candle burning. Just a small gesture, but deeply appreciated. And if you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments, which historical era would you visit if you could dream yourself there tonight? Let your imagination wander, and let's collect these night travels one by one. This is Educational Bedtime, where the stories are long, the tone stays soft, and the past unfolds slowly like parchment beneath candlelight. Now, let your shoulders sink, let your breath deepen, and your thoughts quiet down like dust settling on ancient stone. Our journey begins in the pre-dawn darkness of a Roman household, where you'll experience the harsh reality of being human property. We'll then follow the extraordinary tale of Spartacus, the gladiator who dared to challenge Rome itself. From there, we'll descend into the mysterious underground world of Roman catacombs, where death and faith intertwined in ways that still puzzle archaeologists today. Finally, we'll step into the opulent world of the Roman elite, witnessing the stark contrast between master and slave that defined an entire civilization. Tonight, we travel back nearly 2,000 years to ancient Rome, not to the marble columns and triumphant parades you might imagine, but to the shadowed corners where millions lived lives of unimaginable hardship. We'll walk in the footsteps of those who built an empire with their bare hands, yet never tasted its glory. So settle back, close your eyes, and let the weight of your modern comforts remind you how far we've traveled from those distant, difficult days. Tonight, history will carry you gently towards sleep. Chapter 1. Why you wouldn't survive 24 hours as a Roman slave. Imagine yourself stirring to consciousness in that liminal grey hour before dawn, when darkness still clings to the world, but the first whispers of morning begin to stir. The air around you is thick with the accumulated smell of unwashed bodies, dampened straw, and the particular stainless that comes from too many people breathing in too small a space. Your muscles ache from yesterday's relentless labor, and the rough woolen tunic that serves as your only garment scratches against skin marked by old bruises, fresh welts, and the permanent calluses that have become your body's armor against endless toil. You are no longer who you once were. Perhaps you were a farmer from Gaul, captured when Roman legions swept through your village like a plague of locusts, leaving nothing but smoke and chains in their wake. Maybe you were born into this existence the child of other slaves, knowing no other reality than the one that surrounds you now. Or you might have been a freeman who fell into debt, selling yourself into bondage to survive another day, another month, another year. Your past matters little now. You are property, marked by the brand burned into your shoulder, valued somewhere between a good horse and a decent plot of land. Your worth measured in the tasks you can perform and the years you might endure. The stone floor beneath your feet sends cold shocks through your body as you rise from your pallet. Around you in the slave quarters, dozens of others begin their reluctant stirring, a choreographed awakening born of necessity rather than choice. The air is heavy with breath and sighs, punctuated by the occasional cough that speaks of lungs damaged by dust, poor ventilation, and the accumulated wear of bodies pushed beyond their natural limits. Light filters weakly through high, barred windows, casting long shadows across the cramped space you share with people from every corner of the empire. The Greeks who once debated philosophy, Britons who painted themselves blue for war, Egyptians who knew the secrets of the pyramids, all reduced to this common denominator of servitude. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pompeii reveals that slaves comprised between 10 to 20% of the Roman Empire's population in the 1st century CE. Recent discoveries at Civita Juliana near Pompeii have uncovered actual slave quarters, revealing tiny rooms measuring just 170 square feet, with sparse furnishings, 3 beds, a chamber pot, and a wooden chest. These archaeological finds confirm what literary sources have long suggested about the harsh living conditions endured by millions. Scholars estimate that up to 15 million people lived in bondage throughout the empire at its height, their lives largely invisible in historical records written by and for the elite. Your day begins with the sound you've learned to dread, the sharp crack of the overseer's stick against the doorframe. No words are needed, because words are a luxury reserved for those who have choices. You know the routine as surely as your heart knows to beat. As surely as the sun knows to rise, file out to the courtyard for the morning count, where you stand in neat rows while Roman citizens verify their human inventory. The morning air cuts through your thin clothing like a blade, and you learn to stand perfectly still, eyes downcast as hands inspect you like livestock being prepared for market. Under Roman law, enslaved people had no personal rights and were regarded as the property of their masters. They could be bought, sold, and mistreated at will, and were unable to own property, enter into a contract, or legally marry. Your body belongs to another. Your time is not your own. Your very breath exists at the pleasure of someone who sees you as an investment rather than a person. The morning inspection is a daily reminder of this reality, checking for signs of illness that might reduce your productivity, wounds that might need attention to preserve valuable property, or the telltale signs of defiance that must be crushed before they spread. The distribution of morning tasks happens without ceremony or consideration for your preferences. If you're fortunate enough to work in the house, you might find yourself carrying water from the well, the heavy amphora straining your shoulders until they burn, scrubbing floors with coarse brushes until your knuckles bleed, and the skin wears away in strips, or tending the cooking fires that must never be allowed to die. House slaves often ate better and faced less physical danger, but they lived under the constant scrutiny of their masters, where a broken cup or a moment's inattention might earn a beating or worse. House slaves occupied a strange middle ground in the hierarchy of suffering. You might taste better food, the scraps from your master's table rather than the coarse gruel of field workers. But this small privilege came with its own torments. You were visible, always watched, your every movement subject to judgment and criticism. Domestic slaves were largely in the background, although the distribution of implements in houses like those in Pompeii indicates that their duties could have taken them into public areas of the house, such as the peristyle and atrium. You learn to move like a ghost, present enough to fulfill your duties, but invisible enough to avoid unwanted attention from masters whose moods could change as quickly as Mediterranean weather. But perhaps this morning finds you assigned to construction work, joining the endless stream of human labor that builds Rome's monuments to its own glory. You'll carry blocks of marble that strain your back to its breaking point, each step a small agony, as the weight compresses your spine and threatens to buckle your knees. You'll mix mortar until your hands crack and bleed, the lime burning through any breaks in your skin like liquid fire, and climb precarious scaffolding where a fall means death or crippling injury. The dust gets into everything, your lungs, your eyes, your food, coating your throat and settling in your chest like ground glass. By evening you'll cough up grey phlegm and taste stone in your mouth for days to come. The great amphitheatres, baths and temples that Romans point to with pride are monuments built on a foundation of human suffering. Every marble column represents countless hours of backbreaking labour. Every mosaic floor is laid with pieces cut by hands that bled for beauty they would never be allowed to enjoy. You are part of a vast machine of construction that transforms the physical world, but you will never own so much as a single stone of what you help to create. Or maybe you're sent to the fields beyond the city, where agricultural slaves face a different kind of hell under the burning Mediterranean sun. You'll work the latifundia, the vast estates that feed Rome's millions with grain grown by hands that will never taste the bread it becomes. The majority of Roman slaves worked on agricultural estates for wealthy landowners, where they tilled soil and grew crops that could be consumed or sold by their owners. Your hands, once soft perhaps, are now permanently stained and calloused from handling grain, pruning olive trees whose fruit will become oil for tables you'll never sit at, and harvesting grapes that will ferment into wine for celebrations you'll never attend. The lot of agricultural slaves was probably one of the worst, as they were usually housed in barrack buildings in poor prison-like conditions, and often kept in chains. The work is backbreaking and relentless, driven by overseers who carry whips and have no hesitation in using them. The most troublesome agricultural slaves were confined to ergastula, underground workhouse buildings with narrow barred windows set too high to reach, where slaves worked and slept in chains. These private prisons were so notorious for their brutality that Emperor Hadrian eventually abolished them as part of reforms to improve conditions for slaves. The rhythm of your life is measured not in days or weeks, but in the spaces between meals and the brief moments of rest that punctuate an otherwise endless cycle of labor. Cato, the elder, recommended that slaveholders provide each of their farmhands with specific rations: 4 modiae, roughly 26 kilojou of wheat, and half a litre of olive oil each month, olives, salt, or fish pickle as a condiment, and 42 gallons of wine per annum. But recommendations and reality often diverged dramatically. Food came twice daily, a morning portion of bread, often stale and sometimes mouldy, accompanied by a thin gruel made from barley or whatever grain was cheapest. The evening meal might include vegetables if you're lucky, or a bit of cheese that's gone slightly off and carries the tang of spoilage. Meat was a rarity reserved for festivals or when an animal died and must be consumed quickly. Ancient Roman slaves didn't receive meat on a daily basis, partly because it was expensive and partly because such delicacies were reserved for rich slave owners. When meat did appear in your bowl, it was often horse or donkey flesh, considered unworthy of rich Roman citizens, but deemed suitable for property that breathed and worked. Water, that most basic necessity of life, becomes a luxury measured out in careful portions. You drink what's given to you, often from communal buckets that taste of metal in other people's mouths. The water carries the flavor of the clay pipes it traveled through, sometimes tainted with the minerals that leave a chalky residue on your tongue. Washing is a privilege earned through good behavior or important duties, a reward doled out sparingly. Most days you carry the smell of your labor with you, sweat mingled with dust, animal waste, and the particular odor of fear that seems to cling to your skin like a second garment. The physical discomforts, though constant and grinding, pale beside the psychological weight of your existence. You own nothing, not even yourself. The tunic on your back belongs to your master, as does the straw you sleep on, the food that keeps you alive, and the very air you breathe in the space allotted to you. Your body is not your own. It can be sold, rented out for labor, or used for your master's pleasure, without your consent or consideration for your feelings. Slaves working in households could be victims of physical and sexual abuse, their bodies viewed as instruments for both labor and gratification. You have no legal rights, no recourse, no voice. If someone strikes you, cheats you, or worse, you have no court to appeal to, no justice to seek. You cannot own property, cannot marry legally, cannot make decisions about your own life or the lives of those you might love. Even if you form relationships with other slaves, bonds forged in shared suffering and mutual understanding, those connections exist at the mercy of your master's whims. Families could be separated on a moment's notice. Children sold away from parents, spouses divided, and sent to different households or distant provinces. The threat of punishment hangs over every moment like a sword suspended by the thinnest thread. Roman law gives masters nearly unlimited power over their slaves, though authority so complete it approaches the divine, a moment's defiance. A task performed poorly, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time can result in beatings that leave permanent scars, extended periods in chains that chafe your wrists raw, or confinement to the ergastula. These underground prisons were described as partially underground structures, with high windows to prevent escape, where slaves worked in chains under constant supervision. Some slaves face even darker fates, their suffering measured in degrees that would be unimaginable to the free. Those sent to mines or quarries faced some of the worst working conditions, forced to work with no respite in deep, dark and narrow tunnels. They rarely survive more than a few years, their bodies broken by the constant extraction of precious metals that will adorn their masters' homes and temples. Others are condemned to the gladiator schools, where they're trained to kill and die for entertainment, their lives measured in the brief moments of crowd approval between bouts of orchestrated violence. Gladiators ate a high-carbohydrate diet that included vegetables, legumes and grains, not because their owners refused to feed them meat, but because their high-carb diet helped keep them heavy enough to put on a good fighting show. Yet perhaps most crushing is the randomness of it all. The way your fate depends entirely on the temperament and circumstances of your master. A kind owner might treat you almost like family, allowing you to earn small amounts of money, learn skills, and even hope for eventual freedom through manumission. But that same kindness can vanish overnight, if the master dies, and his heir has different ideas, or if economic troubles force the sale of human assets to pay debts. Slaves could be allowed to hold and manage property called peculium, which they could use as if it were their own, even though it ultimately belonged to their master. This small taste of autonomy made the reality of ownership even more bitter. You learn to read the moods of free citizens the way a sailor reads weather patterns, understanding that your survival depends on this skill. A furrowed brow might mean extra work or reduced rations, A harsh word to another slave could signal that today is not the day to ask for any small favor or mercy. You become an expert in the art of invisible existence, present enough to fulfill your duties, invisible enough to avoid unwanted attention. You learn to anticipate needs before they're spoken, to move silently through spaces not meant for you, to make yourself small and unremarkable even as you perform the tasks that keep Roman society functioning. The nights bring little relief from the burdens of the day. Packed into sleeping quarters with others, privacy becomes a forgotten concept, a luxury from a previous life that seems like a dream you might have had long ago. The sounds of sickness, nightmares, and quiet weeping create a constant backdrop to your rest. Archaeological evidence shows that 3 beds in slave quarters were sized for 2 adults, and possibly 1 child, indicating that slave families were sometimes kept together. Some nights you might catch whispered conversations about escape, about distant homelands that grow more mythical with each passing season, about the possibility of freedom that seems as distant as the stars. But these conversations carry their own dangers. Informants exist even among slaves, desperation sometimes driving people to betray others for the smallest improvement in their own circumstances. The punishment for attempted escape was often death, or worse, prolonged torture designed to serve as an example to others who might harbor similar thoughts. Sleep, when it finally comes despite the discomfort and noise, offers the only true freedom you know. In dreams, you might return to your homeland, embrace family members you'll never see again, or imagine a life where your time belongs to you and your choices shape your days. That dawn always comes, inevitable as death, and with it the return to a reality where you exist solely to serve others' purposes. The transition from dream to waking is perhaps the cruelest moment of each day. That brief instant when you remember what it felt like to be free before the weight of chains, both literal and metaphorical, settles once again on your shoulders. This daily cycle of suffering repeated endlessly is the foundation upon which Roman civilization built its glory. Slavery was a fundamental part of Roman society, shaping both its economy and social structure. Their labor sustained the empire, and their presence influenced nearly every aspect of daily life. It was not the dramatic rebellions or daring escapes that history remembers, but the grinding, relentless routine of powerlessness that wore down human spirits one day at a time. Slavery was so embedded in Roman culture that slaves became almost invisible, and there was certainly no feeling of injustice in this situation on the part of the rulers. The system was so deeply woven into the fabric of Roman society that most citizens couldn't imagine their world without it. They justified it through philosophy and religion, convincing themselves that some people were naturally born to serve while others were destined to rule. The Romans believed that only if some people were slaves could they themselves be free. This wasn't seen as a moral failing, but as a natural order, as inevitable as the rising of the sun or the changing of the seasons. Yet within this system of oppression, small acts of resistance bloomed like flowers growing through cracks in stone. Slaves could protest against their lot in life, in subtle ways such as working more slowly, stealing, truancy, and sabotage. You might deliberately misunderstand an instruction, allowing a task to take longer than necessary. You might pocket a piece of fruit when no one is looking, not because you're particularly hungry, but because the act of taking something for yourself, even something small, affirms your humanity in a system designed to deny it. You might share a joke with another slave, finding moments of laughter that your masters cannot own or control. Recent archaeological research has begun to make visible the lives of slaves who were largely invisible in both ancient and modern accounts. Scholars have developed strategies to reconstruct slaves' lives and experiences in their living and working contexts, making them visible in houses, city streets, workshops, and villas. These investigations reveal that despite attempts to dehumanize them, slaves maintained their own cultural practices, formed families when possible, and created communities of mutual support within the constraints of their bondage. Evidence suggests that slaves could be thought of with great affection by their masters, and children would become very attached to their nannies. Yet this affection was always conditional, always dependent on good behavior and useful service. Even in reasonable households, masters would not hesitate to discipline a disobedient or unruly slave. Some houses kept leg irons in cupboards, and some villas had special cells to punish unruly slaves. Reminders that kindness in slavery was always a privilege that could be revoked rather than a right that could be claimed. The psychological impact of living in such conditions, day after day, year after year, created wounds that no amount of eventual freedom could fully heal. You learn to distrust your own instincts, to question your own worth, to see yourself through the eyes of those who owned you. The constant vigilance required to avoid punishment, the need to read faces and anticipate moods, the careful calibration of every word and gesture, all of this rewired the very fabric of your being. You became expert at survival, but at the cost of losing pieces of yourself that could never be recovered. Some slaves found solace in religion, whether traditional beliefs carried from their homelands or new faiths encountered in their bondage. Domestic religion was one way slaves were included and bound to their master's family. It was customary for slaves to join free members of the household worshipping at the household shrine or lararium. Many houses included a lararium in the kitchen for the sole use of the slaves. These moments of spiritual connection provided brief respites from the harsh realities of daily life. Opportunities to remember that there were forces greater than Roman masters, realms of existence where different rules applied. Education, when it occurred, served the master's needs rather than the slave's development. Educated slaves, particularly Greeks, were valued for their knowledge and skills, but this education was viewed as a tool rather than an enrichment of the human spirit. Educated Greek slaves were particularly valued as tutors for elite Roman children, while others served as scribes, musicians, and personal attendants. A slave who could read and write was more valuable, but this literacy came with its own burdens, serving as a reminder of the intellectual capacity that was being wasted in servitude. The market in human beings operated with the same efficiency as any other commercial enterprise. Slaves were traded from outside Roman borders at several points, and the trade was only lightly regulated by law. Slave markets existed in most cities of the empire, but outside Rome, the largest center was Ephesus. Most of the slaves traded on the market were in their teens and 20s. In Diocletian's edict on price controls, a maximum price for skilled slaves aged 16 to 40 was fixed as up to double that of an unskilled slave, equivalent to 3 tons of wheat for a male and 2.5 for a female. These prices represented not just economic values but the reduction of human lives to mathematical calculations. For those born into slavery, the system was the only reality they had ever known. Children born into rural slavery started helping with age-appropriate tasks quite early, feeding and tending chickens or other poultry, picking up sticks, learning how to weed, gathering apples, and minding the farm's donkey. Childhood in slavery was abbreviated, a brief interlude before the full weight of adult labor and responsibility settled on young shoulders. Young children were not expected to work all day long, but even this small mercy was temporary, lasting only until bodies grew strong enough to contribute more significantly to their master's wealth. The relationship between master and slave was inherently corrupting for both parties, creating a dynamic where absolute power bred arbitrary cruelty, and absolute powerlessness bred a complex mixture of resentment, adaptation, and sometimes even genuine affection. The Roman system of slavery was particularly insidious, because it occasionally offered glimpses of humanity and kindness, making the cruelty more bearable and therefore more sustainable over time. A master who provided decent food or allowed family relationships to continue could command genuine loyalty even while maintaining absolute ownership over human lives. As you lie there now in your own bed, with the freedom to rise when you choose and go where you will, with the ability to speak your mind and make decisions about your own life, imagine those countless souls who never knew such simple liberties. Their stories, largely unrecorded by history, echo still in the stones of ancient Rome. Every tourist who marvels at the Colosseum or the aqueducts walks unknowingly through spaces built and maintained by human suffering on an almost incomprehensible scale. The glory of Rome was made possible by the daily degradation of millions, their lives consumed like fuel to power an empire that saw them as nothing more than breathing tools. This number would have been unequally distributed across the empire, with a higher concentration of enslaved people in urban areas and in Italy. The closer you lived to the center of Roman power, the more likely you were to encounter slaves in every aspect of daily life. They cooked the food, built the buildings, cleaned the streets, raised the children, and performed countless other tasks that kept civilization functioning. Yet, their contributions were invisible, their names forgotten, their suffering minimized or ignored entirely by those who benefited from their labor. The true horror of Roman slavery lay not just in its scale or cruelty, but in its normalization. The way it became so embedded in daily life that questioning it seemed absurd. Free Romans walked past slave markets as casually as they might pass any other shop, seeing human beings sold like hetty or livestock without a second thought. Children grew up in households where owning other people was as natural as owning furniture, learning from their earliest years that some humans were inherently worth less than others. This is the legacy that Roman civilization left behind, a reminder that even the greatest achievements of human culture can be built on foundations of systematic cruelty. For the engineering marvels, the legal innovations, the literary masterpieces, and the architectural wonders that we admire today all emerged from a society that viewed the enslavement of millions as not just acceptable but necessary. And understanding this contradiction is essential to understanding both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty, the way beauty and brutality can coexist in the same civilization, often in the same buildings, sometimes even in the same individuals. The next time you see images of Roman grandeur, the marble columns and intricate mosaics, the vast amphitheaters and elegant villas, remember the hands that built them. Remember the lives that were consumed to create these monuments to human ambition. Remember that behind every stone, every decorative element, every carefully planned space, there were human beings who suffered and died to make it possible. Their names are lost to history, but their humanity deserves to be remembered, their suffering acknowledged, and their contribution to one of history's greatest civilizations finally recognized for what it truly was, a foundation of human misery, supporting a superstructure of unparalleled achievement. Chapter 2: Spartacus, the gladiator who nearly destroyed Rome. In the rolling hills of Capua, about a day's journey south of Rome, stood a gladiator school that would become the birthplace of the most terrifying slave rebellion in Roman history. The year was 73 BCE, and among the men trapped within its walls was a Thracian warrior whose name would echo through the centuries, whose legacy would inspire revolutionaries and freedom fighters for over 2,000 years. His name was Spartacus, and he was about to transform from entertainment for Roman crowds into their greatest nightmare. The details of his early life remain shrouded in the mists of time, lost to history like so many stories of the oppressed and enslaved. But we can piece together fragments of his story from the accounts of Plutarch and Appian, historians who wrote more than a century after his death. He was likely born in the mountainous region of Thrace, in what is now Bulgaria, where fierce tribal warriors had resisted Roman expansion for generations. Some accounts suggest he once served as a soldier, perhaps even fighting alongside Roman forces before circumstances turned him into their enemy. The irony is stark. A man who may have once fought to expand Roman power would become the leader of its greatest internal threat. Other sources whisper that he was a bandit chief, leading raids against Roman settlements until he was finally captured, his freedom stripped away by the very people he had fought against. Plutarch describes him as a Thracian of one of the nomad tribes, and a man not only of high spirit and valiant, but in understanding, also, and in gentleness superior to his condition, and more of a Grecian than the people of his country usually are. When he first came to be sold at Rome, they say a snake coiled itself upon his face as he lay asleep, and his wife, who at this latter time also accompanied him in his flight, his countrywoman, a kind of prophetess, and one of those possessed with the bacchanal frenzy, declared that it was a sign portending great and formidable power to him, with a happy issue. However he came to be enslaved, whether through warfare, banditry, or the countless other ways that freedom could be lost in the ancient world, Spartacus found himself the property of Lentulus Batiatus. This Roman citizen owned one of Capua's most prestigious gladiator schools, a business that transformed human suffering into profitable entertainment. The ludus, as it was called, was both a training ground and a prison, where men were systematically broken down and rebuilt as killing machines for Roman amusement. Today, the historical location of this ludus was near the Capua Amphitheatre in ancient Capua, which can still be visited to this day, though ancient Capua was destroyed by raiders in the Dark Ages. Imagine walking through the gates of this school, past guards who watched every movement with practiced eyes. The compound was built like a fortress, with high walls and locked doors, designed to keep valuable human investments from escaping. Within these confines, perhaps 200 men lived, ate, trained, and waited for their turn in the arena. The gladiators had planned the uprising in advance, but it was revealed to the authorities by a traitor, forcing the rebels to act quickly before they could be punished for their conspiracy. According to historical sources, the conspiracy originally involved about 200 gladiators, though only around 70 to 78 managed to actually escape when their plan was discovered. The training regimen was brutal and methodical, designed to forge warriors from whatever human material arrived at the school. Spartacus would have risen before dawn to begin exercises designed to build strength, speed, and the specific skills needed for his assigned fighting style. As a Thracian, he was likely classified as a Thrax, though some sources describe him as a heavyweight gladiator called a myrmilo. These fighters carried a large oblong shield and used a sword with a broad, straight blade, about 18 inches long. Day after day, he practiced the moves that might keep him alive in the sand of the arena, parrying, thrusting, dodging, and learning to read an opponent's intentions in the split second before death. The training was not just physical but psychological, designed to break down individual identity and rebuild it according to the needs of the arena. But gladiator schools were more than just training grounds. They were carefully managed businesses where human lives were calculated investments. The gladiators represented significant capital expenditure, and their owners wanted to maximize both their performance and their lifespan. Well-performing gladiators ate better than ordinary slaves, receiving portions of meat and wine to maintain their strength. Some even achieved a kind of celebrity status, with admirers who followed their careers, bet on their matches, and collected small tokens bearing their images. The amphitheatre is believed to either have held the real Ludus Batiatus from which the real Spartacus and 70 to 80 of his fellow gladiators escaped in 73 BC, or was built on top of it. Yet, beneath this veneer of privilege and occasional glory, lay the unchanging reality of their condition. They were still slaves, still property, still men who fought and died for other people's entertainment. At the psychological weight of this existence, knowing that each fight might be your last, that your life had value only as long as you could provide spectacle, created a unique form of torment that ate away at the soul. Every gladiator lived with the knowledge that their death was not just possible, but probable, and that when it came, it would be choreographed for the pleasure of crowds who saw them as less than human. Spartacus possessed qualities that set him apart from his fellow gladiators. Contemporary accounts describe him as intelligent and physically imposing, tall and exceptionally strong, with a presence that commanded attention. But more importantly, he possessed something that slavery usually crushed: the ability to inspire others to follow him, to believe that a different future was possible. In the cramped quarters where gladiators slept, surrounded by the smell of sweat and fear and the sounds of men trying to forget their circumstances, he began to whisper of something that most had given up hoping for: freedom. The spark that ignited the rebellion came from an unexpected source. In 73 BCE, Batiatus planned to stage games featuring some of his gladiators, but for reasons lost to history, perhaps suspicions of a brewing plot, or simply the arbitrary cruelty that marked Roman slavery, he decided to increase security and restrict the movements of his human property. This small act of additional oppression, this tightening of chains that were already suffocating, proved to be the catalyst for revolution. It was the final straw that broke the camel's back, the last indignity that transformed resignation into rage. Spartacus and a core group of about 70 gladiators made a desperate decision. Rather than face whatever punishment or restrictions Batiatus had planned, they would attempt the nearly impossible: escape from one of the most secure facilities in the Roman world. Their weapons were improvised: kitchen knives, cooking implements, anything they could find that might serve as arms in their desperate bid for freedom. 78 men revolted at Batiatus's gladiator school, overpowered the guards, and escaped into the streets of Capua. It seemed like a suicide mission, a final act of defiance that would end in crucifixion for all involved. But something extraordinary happened that day in Capua, something that would change the course of Roman history. The gladiators' training, their physical conditioning, and their desperate courage proved more than a match for their guards. They fought their way out of the school, seizing real weapons and armor in the process. Along the way, they seized a caravan carrying weapons for the gladiators from Capua to another city, dramatically improving their armaments. More importantly, they had crossed a line from which there could be no return. They were no longer just escaped slaves, they were rebels in arms against Rome itself. The group's first instinct was to flee toward the Alps, hoping to escape Italy entirely and return to their homelands. But as word of their escape spread throughout the countryside, Something unexpected occurred that would transform a simple breakout into a war. Other slaves began to join them. Not just gladiators, but agricultural workers, household servants, and free people so desperate they were willing to risk everything for a chance at a different life. Breaking through the city gates, the rebels established a camp on the summit of the dormant Mount Vesuvius, a location that would prove to be strategically brilliant. The Roman authorities initially treated this as a minor police matter, a routine case of runaway slaves that could be handled by local forces. A small force under the command of Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber was sent to capture what they assumed was just another band of fugitives. The Romans, in their arrogance, could not conceive that slaves, mere property, could pose a genuine military threat to the most powerful empire in the world. Glaber cornered the rebels on Mount Vesuvius, believing he had them trapped on the volcanic slopes with no way to escape. The dormant volcano appeared to offer only one route down, which the Romans controlled. This is where Spartacus revealed the military genius that would make him legendary. Rather than surrender or attempt a suicidal frontal assault against superior numbers, he devised a plan that demonstrated both tactical brilliance and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Using vines and ropes, his men descended the supposedly unclimbable cliffs of Vesuvius under cover of darkness, moving like ghosts through the night to circle around and attack the Roman camp from behind. The surprise was complete and devastating. Glaber's forces were routed, their weapons and supplies falling into rebel hands, providing the escaped gladiators with professional military equipment. This victory transformed everything. What had begun as a desperate escape attempt became a full-scale rebellion that threatened the very foundations of Roman society. As slaves across southern Italy began to flock to Spartacus's banner, bringing the rebel force from dozens to several tens of thousands in a matter of months. More shocking still, some free citizens, people crushed by debt, dispossessed farmers, and those who had suffered under Roman rule also joined the cause. His forces raided nearby Roman villas and estates, causing his army to grow in numbers as more slaves gained their freedom through force of arms. By the end of 73 BC, Spartacus and his fellow commander Crixus were in command of a large group of armed men, with a proven ability to withstand Roman armies. Their numbers had swelled to some 70,000 fighters, a massive force that represented a genuine threat to Roman authority. Spartacus faced challenges that would have broken lesser leaders. His followers came from dozens of different cultures and spoke various languages. They had different ideas about what they were fighting for and where they should go. Some wanted to return to their homelands, others sought to establish a new life in Italy itself, and still others dreamed of marching on Rome and overthrowing the entire system of slavery. Managing this diverse coalition while staying ahead of Roman forces required diplomatic skills as much as military ones. Spartacus's army was large but ethnically and nationally diverse, comprising Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and other peoples enslaved by Rome. The army also absorbed shepherd slaves, and absorbed many of the herdsmen and shepherds of the region. This created a large but sometimes unreliable force, as most were agricultural slaves who had never held weapons before joining the rebellion. The core of Spartacus's army consisted of the 78 gladiators who had escaped with him from Capua, professional fighters who formed the disciplined center around which the larger force organized itself. The rebels' success bred its own problems. As their numbers swelled to over 100,000, including men, women, and children, they became less of a mobile fighting force and more of a migrating population. They needed food, shelter, and supplies for a massive group, all while staying ahead of the Roman legions that were now taking them very seriously indeed. Initially, the slave army was armed with sickles, pitchforks, rakes, and other agricultural tools, as well as clubs and sharpened stakes. Some slaves, skilled in basket weaving, made woven shields for protection. Later, they acquired real weapons through battles and raids on Roman armories and supply convoys. Rome's response escalated dramatically. After several humiliating defeats that shocked the Senate and demonstrated the rebellion's serious military capabilities, the task of crushing the uprising was assigned to Marcus Licinius Crassus. This decision represented a fundamental shift in Roman strategy, from treating the rebellion as a police matter to recognizing it as a genuine military threat. Crassus was one of Rome's wealthiest and most ambitious politicians, a man who understood that his political future depended on ending this embarrassment quickly and decisively. He assembled 8 legions, nearly 50,000 professional soldiers, and began a systematic campaign to corner and destroy the rebel army. The appointment of Crassus marked a turning point in the conflict. This was no longer a series of skirmishes between local forces and escaped slaves, but a war between a professional Roman army and a force that had proven it could defeat Roman legions in open battle. Crassus was given a praetorship and assigned 6 new legions in addition to the 2 formerly consular legions of Gellius and Lentulus, giving him an estimated army of some 32,000 to 48,000 trained Roman infantry plus auxiliaries. His wealth allowed him to fund much of the campaign personally, ensuring his troops were well equipped and supplied. Crassus treated his legions with harsh, even brutal discipline, reviving the punishment of unit decimation within his army. When a segment of his army fled from battle, abandoning their weapons, Crassus implemented the long unused but crucial punishment of decimation, executing 1 out of every 10 men, with the victims selected by drawing lots. Plutarch reports that many things horrible and dreadful to see occurred during this decimation. The first historical instance of decimation was in 72 BC, under the command of Marcus Licinius Crassus during the Third Servile War. A unit of 500 men who fled from battle was decimated, with some 50 men executed. The conflict that followed was unlike anything Rome had seen in generations. This wasn't a war against foreign enemies or rival cities, but a struggle that struck at the very foundation of Roman society. If slaves could successfully rebel and defeat Roman armies, what did that mean for an economy and culture built on human bondage? The psychological impact on Roman citizens was profound, forcing them to confront the contradictions in their society and the potential for their own property to rise against them. Spartacus proved to be a formidable military commander, demonstrating tactical flexibility and strategic thinking that impressed even his enemies. He won several more victories against Roman forces, using his army's mobility to strike where the Romans were weak and withdraw before they could bring their superior numbers to bear. And for nearly 2 years, he kept his massive force together while evading or defeating every Roman army sent against him. His successes included defeats of praetors Glaber and Verenius, and later victories against the consular armies of Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus. In the spring of 72 BC, the rebels moved north towards Cisalpine Gaul. The Senate, recognizing the scale of the threat, sent 2 armies totaling 30,000 men, led by consuls Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus. The consuls planned to encircle and crush Spartacus near the Gargano Peninsula. To avoid encirclement, Spartacus sent his main forces northwest, while dispatching a large detachment under Crixus to the slopes of Mount Garganus. The strategic division would prove to be a crucial mistake, as it allowed the Romans to defeat the rebels piecemeal. The division of rebel forces led to the first major Roman victory against the rebellion. Gellius's army caught Crixus and his detachment near Mount Garganus, where they were defeated in a bloody battle that killed Crixus himself. This victory demonstrated that the rebels could be beaten by professional Roman forces, and it deprived Spartacus of one of his most capable lieutenants. According to Appian, the battle between Gellius's legions and Crixus's men near Mount Garganus was the beginning of a long and complex series of military maneuvers that almost resulted in the Spartan forces directly assaulting the city of Rome itself. But the rebellion contained the seeds of its own destruction. Internal disagreements about strategy and goals led to splits within the rebel leadership. Many popular modern accounts suggest there was a factional split between those under Spartacus, who wished to escape over the Alps to freedom, and those under Crixus, who wished to stay in southern Italy to continue raiding and plundering. And some contingents broke away from the main force, only to be defeated separately by Roman armies. The rebels' numbers, once their strength, became a liability as supplies grew scarce and coordination became increasingly difficult. The arrival of Crassus changed the entire dynamic of the war. Unlike previous Roman commanders who had underestimated their opponents, Crassus understood he was facing a genuine military threat that required systematic and ruthless suppression. His first engagement with Vesticus came when his legate Mummius disobeyed orders and attacked the rebel army prematurely. Mummius's forces were routed, and Crassus responded with characteristic brutality. The legions under Mummius were punished harshly. 500 men were selected, of which 50 were chosen by lot and beaten to death by their comrades. From this point, the war started to turn decisively in Rome's favor. Spartacus, recognizing the increased pressure and the professional nature of Crassus's campaign, supposedly tried to hire pirate ships at the Strait of Messina to take his followers to Sicily, where he hoped to liberate more slaves and reinforce his army. According to Plutarch, Spartacus made a bargain with Cilician pirates to transport him and some 2,000 of his men to Sicily. However, he was betrayed by the pirates, who took payment and then abandoned the rebels. They took his money and left the slave army stranded in the toe of Italy. At this point, Crassus took measures to ensure the rebels couldn't escape by sea, and began building fortifications across the entire peninsula to make sure the slave army couldn't escape by land either. While Spartacus was attempting to carry his rebellion to Sicily, Crassus endeavored to end the war by effectively besieging the entire toe of Italy. Crassus's legions followed, and upon arrival built fortifications across the isthmus at Rhegium, creating a massive wall and ditch system that trapped the rebels in southern Calabria. As this was happening, and Crassus was nearing his long-awaited military glory, his main rival Pompey was returning with his legions from Hispania. The Senate had also sent reinforcements under the command of Marcus Terentius Varro Lucullus, with Pompey's legions marching from the north and Lucullus's troops landing in Brundisium. Crassus realized that if he did not put down the slave revolt quickly, credit for the war would go to the general who arrived with reinforcements. This political pressure forced Crassus to accelerate his campaign, leading to the final confrontation. The end came in 71 BCE, in a final, desperate battle near the Salarius River in southern Italy. Spartacus broke through the Roman lines and made a dash to the north, up the toe of Italy. This was the point when things began to fall apart for the slave army. They had reached their limit after 2 years of running, and discipline fell apart as small groups went out to attack the Romans, independently. One large group was split apart from the main army, and over 12,000 of the rebels were killed in separate engagements. When Spartacus finally chose to make his last stand, it was with the knowledge that this would likely be his final act. Anticipating the decisive battle to come, Spartacus is said to have slain his horse, stating that if his army carried the day he would have his choice from among the fine horses of the Romans, and if he lost, he would no longer have need of a mount. This gesture demonstrated both his understanding of the desperate nature of their situation and his commitment to fighting to the death rather than accepting capture and the inevitable crucifixion that would follow. The final battle itself was a testament to the courage and desperation of men who had nothing left to lose. Spartacus, according to Roman accounts, fought with such ferocity that he carved a path of destruction through the Roman ranks, seeking to reach and kill Crassus himself in single combat. The image of the former slave Gladiator cutting through professional legionaries, desperate to reach the wealthy Roman general who had orchestrated his downfall, captures the personal nature of this conflict between oppressor and oppressed. But numbers and equipment told in the end. The professional legions overwhelmed the rebel force, and Spartacus himself fell in the fighting, his body so hacked and battered that it was never definitively identified among the thousands of dead. The aftermath was as brutal as the rebellion itself had been inspiring. Crassus took those 6,000 survivors and subjected them to the cruelest form of execution that the Romans knew, crucifixion. All 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to the gates of Rome. That distance is about 120 miles, or 93 kilometers, which means there was one crucifixion every 32 meters, or 100 feet. For miles and miles, travelers would pass beneath the bodies of men who had dared to claim their freedom, a grim reminder of the price of defying Roman power and the lengths to which Rome would go to maintain control over its human property. The crucified rebels were left to hang until their bodies decomposed completely, a process that could take weeks or even months. The sight of thousands of rotting corpses lining one of Rome's most important roads served as a powerful deterrent to any other slaves who might harbor thoughts of rebellion. It was psychological warfare on a massive scale, designed to break the spirit of the enslaved population and demonstrate the futility of resistance. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who challenge Rome, and this fate awaits anyone who follows their example. Yet, despite the brutal suppression of his rebellion, Spartacus had achieved something that echoed far beyond his death. He had shown that slaves were not just property to be used and discarded, but human beings capable of courage, leadership, and the fundamental desire for freedom that no amount of oppression could entirely extinguish. His rebellion forced Romans to confront the contradictions in their society, the way their wealth and leisure depended on the systematic brutalization of millions of human beings. It led to changes in how slaves were treated, if only from fear of future uprisings. The Spartacus uprising had several long-term repercussions for Rome. Romans began, at least initially, to treat their slaves better out of fear of another uprising. Many of the larger states which were formerly run by slaves were now run by freedmen, sometimes in sharecropping arrangements. Although not a direct result of the Third Servile War, over the next several centuries, most reforms regarding slaves were in the direction of better treatment and more rights. The rebellion had demonstrated that the slave system, while profitable, carried within it the seeds of its own destruction. The name Spartacus became a symbol that transcended his own time and place, inspiring countless others who found themselves fighting against overwhelming odds. Centuries later, other rebels and revolutionaries would invoke his memory, seeing in his story proof that even the most oppressed could rise up against their oppressors. From the slave revolts in Haiti, led by Toussaint Louverture, who was called the Black Spartacus, to modern movements for human rights, the Gladiator who refused to die for entertainment has remained an enduring symbol of the human spirit's refusal to accept bondage. Karl Marx once noted in a letter to Engels that Spartacus was among the greatest, if not the greatest hero of the ancient world, and held him up as an example to be followed. The philosopher Voltaire described the Third Servile War as the only just war in history. In the 20th century, revolutionary movements adopted his name, with the left-wing splinter group of the German Social Democrats led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, calling themselves the Spartacists. His story became the subject of novels, films, and television series that continue to inspire new generations. The true significance of Spartacus lies not just in his military achievements, impressive though they were, but in what he represented. In a world where slavery was accepted as natural and inevitable, he proved that the desire for freedom could not be completely suppressed. His rebellion demonstrated that those deemed property by law and custom were still human beings, with the capacity for courage, strategic thinking, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for liberty. Whether he started his revolt to end slavery in Rome, or simply to win his own freedom, no longer matters. What matters is what he has come to symbolize. The actual motivations behind Spartacus's revolt may have been more personal than ideological. Historical sources suggest that rather than seeking to overthrow the entire system of slavery, he and his followers simply wanted to escape Italy and return to their homelands. There is no evidence that he aimed to reform Roman society or establish a new social order based on equality. His goals appear to have been practical rather than revolutionary in the modern sense, focused on survival and freedom rather than systematic social change. But symbols often transcend the intentions of those who create them, and Spartacus became something larger than the historical figure who bore that name. The courage, tenacity, and ability of the Thracian gladiator who held Roman forces at bay for some 2 years, and built a handful of followers into an assemblage of over 120,000 men, continues to inspire admiration across cultures and centuries. His story speaks to something fundamental in the human experience: the refusal to accept injustice even when resistance seems hopeless. The rebellion also had significant effects on the careers of the Roman generals involved. Crassus used his victory to further his political ambitions, though he was frustrated when Pompey arrived in time to claim some credit for ending the rebellion. The two generals used their success in putting down the rebellion to influence the consular elections of 70 BC in their favor, demonstrating how even the suppression of slave revolts could be transformed into political capital in the competitive world of Roman politics. In many ways, the Third Servile War represented the collision of two different worlds: the rigidly hierarchical society of Rome, built on slavery and conquest, and the fundamental human desire for freedom and dignity that no amount of oppression could entirely eliminate. Spartacus and his followers came from every corner of the known world, united only by their shared condition of bondage and their willingness to risk everything to escape it. Their diversity was both a strength and a weakness, providing numbers and varied skills while creating challenges of coordination and unified purpose. The rebellion's ultimate failure should not obscure its remarkable achievements. For nearly 3 years, a force composed primarily of escaped slaves and dispossessed people held their own against the most powerful military force in the ancient world. They defeated multiple Roman armies, captured vast amounts of territory, and forced Rome to commit enormous resources to suppressing them. They proved that slaves could fight as effectively as free men when given the opportunity and proper leadership. The story of Spartacus reminds us that history is shaped not only by kings and emperors, but by ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances and choose to act with courage. His rebellion occurred at a time when Rome was at the height of its power, confident in its military superiority and the stability of its social system. The fact that a gladiator and his followers could shake this mighty empire to its foundations demonstrates the potential for resistance that exists even in the most oppressive circumstances. As we move from this tale of rebellion and tragedy, we transition to another hidden aspect of Roman life that challenges our understanding of the ancient world. While Spartacus and his followers fought for freedom under the Mediterranean sun, another story was unfolding in the darkness beneath Rome's streets. And the mysterious underground world of the Catacombs, different communities were carving out sacred spaces in the shadows, creating a hidden city of the dead that would preserve secrets and stories for millennia to come. From the blood and sand of the arena to the quiet chambers where the living honored the dead, we journey now into the subterranean realm where Romans of all backgrounds sought eternal rest, and where archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the complex religious and cultural landscape of the Eternal City. Chapter 3. The Lost Catacombs, Rome's underground city of the dead. Beneath the bustling streets of ancient Rome, while merchants hawked their wares in the forum and senators debated in marble halls, another world existed in complete darkness. Miles upon miles of tunnels stretched through the soft volcanic rock beneath the city, creating a vast underground network that housed the dead and sheltered secrets that would puzzle archaeologists for centuries to come. These subterranean passages, known as catacombs, represent one of the most mysterious and misunderstood aspects of Roman civilization, a hidden realm where the living honored the dead and where different faiths found common ground in the democracy of death. The discovery of Rome's catacombs began not with scholarly investigation, but with accident. In the 16th century, workers digging in a vineyard outside Rome's walls broke through into a chamber filled with ancient bones and decorated with faded paintings. What they had stumbled upon was just a tiny fraction of a subterranean world that would eventually reveal over 60 distinct catacomb complexes, containing hundreds of miles of tunnels and hundreds of thousands of burial sites. Today we know that the Roman catacombs stretch over 150 kilometers beneath the city, making them one of the largest underground burial sites in the world. There are more than 60 catacomb complexes in Rome, although only a few are open to the public. The rediscovery of these underground cities owes much to the dedication of Antonio Bosio, an esteemed archaeologist who became known as the Columbus of the Catacombs. Bosio dedicated decades to exploring and researching these subterranean marvels, culminating in his work Roma Sotterranea, published in his meticulous documentation of the catacombs he explored, including descriptions of their decorations and the people interred inside, laid the foundation for all future catacomb research. Though some of his entries have since been found to be erroneous, Bosio's work provided the first systematic study of these remarkable underground spaces. To understand the mystery of these underground cities, we must first grasp how radically they departed from Roman tradition. For centuries, Romans had cremated their dead, burning bodies on funeral pyres, and storing the ashes in elaborate urns. This practice was so deeply embedded in Roman culture that the shift of underground burial represented not just a change in funeral customs, but a fundamental transformation in how people thought about death, the body, and the afterlife. The original Roman custom had been cremation of the human body, after which the burnt remains were kept in a pot, urn, or ash chest, often deposited in a columbarium or dovecote. Rome faced two problems in the 2nd century CE: overpopulation and a lack of land. The city was growing, and many of the buildings were 4 or 5 stories tall. Since burials were not allowed inside the city walls, and early Christians did not agree with the pagan practice of cremating their dead, communal underground cemeteries provided a practical alternative. The transition began subtly in the 2nd century CE, as new religious ideas spread through the empire's diverse population. Early Christians, following Jewish burial traditions, rejected cremation in favor of interment, believing in the eventual resurrection of the physical body. But they were not alone in this practice. The complex system of tunnels that would later be known as the catacombs were first excavated by the Etruscan people that lived in the region predating the Romans. These tunnels were first excavated in the process of mining for various rock resources, such as limestone and sandstone. These quarries became the basis for later excavation, first by the Romans for rock resources and then by the Christians and Jews for burial sites and mass graves. Followers of various mystery religions Jewish communities, and even some traditional Roman families began to seek alternatives to cremation. This opening up the possibility that the whole idea of catacombs originated with the Jewish community, as underground burials had a precedent in Jewish history and likely offered an appealing alternative to Rome's Jews. Imagine descending into one of these ancient burial grounds through a narrow entrance hidden among the tombs that lined Rome's roads. The stairway cuts steeply downward through layers of tufa, the soft volcanic stone that made excavation possible while remaining structurally stable. As you move deeper into this underworld, the sounds of the city above fade away like whispers carried off by the wind, replaced by an otherworldly silence broken only by the soft echo of your footsteps and the occasional drip of moisture seeping through the rock. The air grows cooler as you descend, carrying with it the musty scent of ages and the weight of countless generations who found their final rest in these depths. The excavation work was performed by specialized workers called fossilers, professional gravediggers who possessed knowledge that seems almost supernatural. They could navigate the dark tunnels without losing their way, calculate structural loads to prevent collapses, and create ventilation systems that brought fresh air deep underground. These skilled excavators constructed vast systems of galleries and passages within the catacombs, creating a multi-leveled underground network. These galleries, descending several stories, were joined by narrow steps that could span up to 4 levels deep. They lie 7 to 19 meters below the surface in an area of more than 2.4 square kilometers. The tunnels themselves follow no single pattern, reflecting the organic way they grew over centuries. Some stretch in straight lines for hundreds of yards, while others branch and curve in seemingly random directions, dictated by the geological conditions and the needs of different communities. The passages are about 2.5 by 1 meter in size, just wide enough for 2 people to pass. Their walls lined with rectangular niches called loculi. Each loculus was carefully carved to accommodate a single body, measuring 40 to 60 centimeters high and 120 to 50 centimeters long. These burial niches were sealed with marble slabs or terracotta tiles, creating a honeycomb effect that extended along the tunnel walls for miles. Inscriptions in Latin, Greek, and sometimes Hebrew mark many of the graves, providing tantalizing glimpses into the lives of people whose names would otherwise be lost to history. Although thousands of inscriptions were lost as time passed, many of those remaining indicate the social rank or job title of their inhabitants. However, most of the inscriptions simply indicate how loving a couple was, or the love of parents for their children. A common and particularly interesting inscription found in Roman catacombs is the ichthys, or monogram of Christ, which reads Ichthys, standing for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. But it's the artwork that truly captures the imagination and challenges our understanding of ancient religious boundaries. Found in chambers called cubicula, intended for family burials, the walls come alive with frescoes that blend Christian, pagan, and Jewish symbolism in ways that defy simple categorization. Here, the Good Shepherd stands beside images of Orpheus charming wild beasts. Fair scenes from the Hebrew Bible appear alongside depictions of Roman gods and goddesses. The Christian catacombs are extremely important for the history of early Christian art, as they contain the great majority of examples from before about 400 AD, in fresco and sculpture, as well as gold glass medallions. The most intriguing paintings are those that seem to tell stories we can no longer fully decode. In the Catacomb of Priscilla, discovered in the 19th century, archaeologists found what they believe may be the oldest known depiction of the Virgin Mary, but the image is subtle, almost ambiguous, a woman with a child, painted in the gentle style of Roman domestic art. Was this intentionally disguised Christian iconography? Or are we reading meaning into images that held different significance for their creators? The Catacombs of Priscilla are sometimes referred to as the Queen of the Catacombs, because they harbor graves of many early Christian martyrs. Their galleries stretch a total length of about 8 miles, containing some 40,000 burials. Recent archaeological investigations have revealed that our understanding of these underground spaces has been incomplete. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques have identified vast unmapped sections of the catacomb networks. Non-invasive techniques such as ground-penetrating radar allow archaeologists to map underground areas without causing disturbance. 3D scanning enables detailed documentation of carvings, inscriptions, and architectural elements within the catacomb walls. Scientific analysis methods like carbon dating and DNA testing on skeletal remains found in the catacombs provide valuable insights into demographics, health conditions during ancient times, and familial relationships among those interred there. The discovery of the Via Latina catacomb represents one of the most significant archaeological finds of the modern era. During the building of an apartment house on the Via Latina in Rome in 1955, a small Christian catacomb was brought to light. A chance archaeological discovery that turned out to be a startling revelation. The architectural form and painted decoration of the catacomb were much remarked. Not only were they exceptionally lavish, they also proved exceedingly difficult to fit into the traditional picture of the development of Christian art in late antique Rome. These frescoes mix pagan and Christian themes in ways that had never been seen before, challenging scholars' understanding of religious boundaries in the 4th century. The Via Latina catacomb is famous for the unique mix of Christian Old and New Testament and pagan subjects in its paintings. Rome is decorated entirely with paintings of the pagan hero Hercules, showing him as a hero or savior, with a focus on the afterlife and life after death. For many of the other rooms, the subject matter is primarily Christian art, depicting images of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Notable art scenes depicted include the flood scene, Abraham's vision of the 3 angels under the oak of Mamre, crossing of the Red Sea, and the ascension of Elijah and the Good Shepherd. This mixture suggests that different religious communities may have shared these subterranean spaces, creating a hidden world where diverse faiths coexisted in ways that were impossible above ground. The people who created these underground cities remain largely mysterious figures in history. We know that the fossors were more than just laborers. Evidence suggests they also served as guides for funeral processions, guardians of burial sites, and keepers of the elaborate rituals that took place in the catacombs. Some graves show signs of repeated visits, worn steps leading to family chambers, areas cleared for gatherings, and evidence of meals shared among the tombs. The fossors possessed an intimate knowledge of their underground domain that went far beyond simple excavation skills. They understood the geology of the Roman countryside, knew how to follow veins of soft tufa while avoiding harder layers that would have made excavation impossible, and designed complex ventilation systems that are marvels of ancient engineering. This practice of dining with the dead, called refrigerium, reveals another layer of mystery in catacomb culture. Romans had always honored their deceased with offerings and memorial meals, but the underground gatherings seem to have been different, more intimate, more secretive, and involving rituals that left little trace in the historical record. Archaeological evidence points to elaborate banquets held in underground chambers, complete with fine pottery, imported foods, and decorations that suggest these were joyous, rather than somber occasions. Some Christian catacombs have chambers in addition to those used to prepare remains, including some large enough to hold underground funerals, and others with carved-in benches and tables that were used by relatives to hold memorial meals near the remains of their deceased loved ones. The preservation of organic materials in the catacombs has provided archaeologists with unprecedented insights into ancient Roman life. Textiles that should have disintegrated centuries ago remain partially intact, showing intricate weaving patterns and dyes that reveal trade connections across the Mediterranean. Wooden coffins bear tool marks that tell us about ancient carpentry techniques, while flowers and food offerings provide evidence of seasonal burial customs. Through research, it has been found that the population's diet consisted of freshwater fish. One sample, considered to be a 2-year-old child, shows that children in ancient Rome were breastfed, and this child, in particular, had not yet been weaned off its mother's milk. Perhaps most remarkably, some chambers contain what appear to be early forms of environmental control systems. Engineers studying the catacomb ventilation systems have discovered that the ancient designers created complex networks of shafts and chambers that naturally circulated air, maintaining consistent temperatures and preventing the accumulation of dangerous gases. This level of sophistication suggests that the catacombs were intended for long-term use and regular visitation, not just as simple burial grounds, but as active centers of religious and social life. The engineering challenges overcome by the fossors were immense, requiring them to balance structural integrity with accessibility, ventilation with security, and the practical needs of burial with the spiritual requirements of different religious communities. The question of secrecy continues to puzzle researchers and challenge popular assumptions about catacomb culture. Popular imagination often depicts the catacombs as hidden refuges, where persecuted Christians gathered in secret, But the archaeological evidence presents a more complex picture. Many catacomb entrances were clearly marked and publicly known. Roman law at the time prohibited the burial of the deceased in the interior of the city, for which reason all of the catacombs were located outside of the walls. These separated places below ground constituted refuges in which the Christians could bury their own freely using Christian symbols. Inscriptions and artwork suggest that people from different religious backgrounds were sometimes buried in the same complexes, implying a level of tolerance and cooperation that doesn't match the narrative of systematic persecution. Yet there are undeniably secretive elements to catacomb culture that cannot be ignored. Hidden chambers, accessible only through concealed passages, coded symbols that appear throughout the tunnel systems, and burial practices that seem designed to obscure rather than commemorate the dead all point to communities that had reasons to keep some of their activities private. The truth, as so often in archaeology, appears to lie somewhere between the extremes of complete secrecy and total openness. Recent discoveries have added new dimensions to the mystery and complexity of catacomb culture. Researchers have uncovered evidence of what appears to be connections between the catacombs and other underground religious spaces. The discovery suggests that different religious communities may have shared these subterranean spaces more extensively than previously thought, creating a hidden world where diverse faiths coexisted in ways that were impossible above ground. In recent years, unique strains of bacteria have been discovered that thrive in catacombs, inducing mineral efflorescence and decay, presenting new challenges for preservation efforts. The inscriptions found throughout the catacombs tell stories of ordinary people whose lives would otherwise be completely forgotten by history. There's Abbacius, who describes himself as a disciple of the pure shepherd and mentions traveling to Rome and beyond. There's Pectorius, whose epitaph contains what scholars believe is an early Christian acrostic poem, and there are hundreds of graves marked simply with names, ages, and brief expressions of love or loss that remain deeply moving after nearly 2,000 years. These personal memorials remind us that behind the grand narrative of empires and religions, the catacombs were ultimately about individual human lives and the universal desire to be remembered by those we leave behind. Some of the most intriguing inscriptions are those written in languages or scripts that scholars cannot fully decipher. Mysterious symbols appear throughout the catacomb systems, some clearly Christian, others apparently pagan, and many that resist classification entirely. These cryptic markings may represent private religious practices, family codes, or spiritual beliefs that existed outside the mainstream of ancient Roman religion. They hint at the rich diversity of belief and practice that flourished in the multicultural environment of imperial Rome, much of which has been lost to history but survives in these underground testimonies. The Jewish catacombs provide a particularly fascinating glimpse into a community that has often been overlooked in discussions of ancient Rome. The Jewish catacombs were discovered in 1918, and archaeological excavations continued for 12 years. The most extensive and well-preserved is the catacomb at Villa Torlonia, which extends for more than 13,000 square meters and dates back to the period between the 2nd and 3rd centuries. The structure has two entrances, one on Via Syracuse and the other inside Villa Torlonia. The Jewish catacombs are distinguished from their Christian counterparts by various signs, including parts of the Old Testament and the symbol of a candlestick, with 7 branches spotted on the walls. The walls and ceilings are decorated with Jewish motifs, such as menorahs, the Ark of the Covenant, and symbolic fruits like the pomegranate and the etrog. The abandonment of the catacombs is almost as mysterious as their creation. By the 5th century CE, most of the underground burial grounds had fallen out of use, their entrances sealed or forgotten. The shift away from catacomb burial coincided with Christianity's transformation from a persecuted minority to the empire's official religion, suggesting that these underground spaces served purposes that became unnecessary once Christians could worship openly. After the Edict of Milan in 313, many Roman Christians flocked to the catacombs in order to find relics from the martyrs, and would pillage through the remains. Due to this, vandalism became rampant in the catacombs. In 380, Christianity became a state religion. At first, many still desired to be buried in chambers alongside the martyrs. However, the practice of catacomb burial declined slowly, and the dead were increasingly buried in church cemeteries. During the barbarian invasion of Italy in the 8th century, many catacombs suffered continuous lootings, for which reason the popes caused the still remaining relics to be transferred to the city's churches. After these transfers, some catacombs were abandoned completely and forgotten for centuries, their locations lost to memory, and their entrances buried by time and urban development. Yet even as the catacombs were abandoned for new burials, they weren't entirely forgotten by all. Medieval pilgrims continued to visit some sites, seeking relics of early Christian martyrs, and maintaining the connection between the living and the dead that had been so central to catacomb culture. Renaissance explorers, driven by curiosity about the ancient world, began systematic investigations that would eventually lead to modern archaeology. These early investigators often caused more damage than they prevented, removing artifacts and decorations that are now scattered in museums around the world, but their efforts also preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever. Today, as researchers use ever more sophisticated techniques to explore these underground labyrinths, new mysteries continue to emerge. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest that unmapped catacomb networks may extend much farther than previously thought, possibly connecting to other underground structures throughout Rome. Some researchers speculate that the city's ancient underground infrastructure, including aqueducts, sewers, and storage chambers, may have been more integrated than we've realized. The possibility that Rome possessed a comprehensive underground network that served multiple functions, from water distribution to waste management to burial and religious activities, would represent a level of urban planning sophistication that rivals modern cities. In recent decades, various archaeological expeditions have unearthed new sections of Rome's underworld, ranging from previously unknown catacombs to complex tunnel systems. These discoveries often employ advanced technologies like ground-penetrating radar to identify sites before excavation begins. Many of the recent excavations have led to the discovery of important artifacts, including inscriptions, frescoes, and ritual objects that continue to reshape our understanding of ancient Roman society. The collaboration between modern technology and traditional archaeological methods has opened new possibilities for catacomb research, allowing scholars to explore these underground spaces without damaging their delicate environments. The catacombs remain active archaeological sites, with new discoveries regularly challenging our understanding of ancient Roman society. Each newly opened chamber, each freshly translated inscription, and each recovered artifact adds to our knowledge while raising new questions about the communities that created this remarkable underground world. Responsibility for the Christian catacombs lies with the Holy See, which has set up active official organizations for this purpose. The Pontifical Commission of Sacred Archaeology directs excavations and restoration works, while the study of the catacombs is directed in particular by the Pontifical Academy of Archaeology. The study of catacomb art has revealed sophisticated artistic traditions that bridge the gap between classical Roman culture and emerging Christian aesthetics. From the 1st to the 6th century, the art in Roman Christian catacombs progressively went into phases: an early phase, an Old Testament phase, and a New Testament phase. The earliest Christian art shows typically Roman styles used for decorating homes, with secular iconography adapted to religious purposes. Later phases show the development of distinctly Christian artistic conventions that would influence religious art for centuries to come. The imagery painted on the walls or engraved onto stone sarcophagi favors biblical motifs, reminiscent of eternal life, the resurrection, the miraculous powers of various biblical figures, and most importantly the healing and salvific powers of Jesus Christ. Modern preservation efforts face unique challenges in maintaining these ancient underground spaces. The delicate balance of humidity and temperature that has preserved organic materials for nearly 2 millennia is constantly threatened by urban development above ground, pollution that seeps through the rock, and the simple presence of visitors whose breath and body heat can alter the microenvironment of sealed chambers. Conservation scientists work continuously to monitor and maintain conditions that will ensure these irreplaceable cultural treasures survive for future generations. Due to high levels of humidity and temperature, bone preservation has been negatively affected in some areas of the catacombs, making the study of ancient populations more challenging but also more urgent. The social implications of catacomb burial reveal fascinating insights into ancient Roman attitudes toward death, community, and social hierarchy. While wealthy Romans could afford elaborate tombs and decorated chambers, the poor were often relegated to simple loculi in less desirable areas of the catacomb networks. Yet, the very existence of communal burial grounds represents a democratization of death that was relatively unusual in the ancient world. The different sections within each complex were designated for specific groups or families based on social status or religious affiliation, but the overall structure created a sense of shared community that transcended many of the barriers that divided people in life. The influence of catacomb culture extended far beyond the boundaries of ancient Rome. As Christianity spread throughout the empire and beyond, the practices and artistic traditions developed in the Roman catacombs influenced burial customs and religious art across Europe and the Mediterranean. The iconography, architectural forms, and spiritual concepts that emerged from these underground communities became foundational elements of Christian culture, spreading along trade routes and through missionary activities to shape religious practices in distant lands. The impact of this underground world on the development of Western civilization cannot be overstated. Archaeological evidence suggests that the catacombs served functions beyond simple burial that we are only beginning to understand. The discovery of workshop areas, storage chambers, and spaces that appear to have been used for religious education indicates that these underground networks functioned as complete communities rather than mere cemeteries. The fosses may have lived underground for extended periods, maintaining not just the physical structure of the catacombs, but serving as guardians of religious traditions and keepers of community memory. This residential aspect of catacomb life adds another layer to our understanding of how these spaces functioned in ancient Roman society. The relationship between different religious communities in the catacombs provides valuable insights into the complex religious landscape of late imperial Rome, rather than the clear divisions between pagan, Jewish, and Christian communities that we might expect from literary sources. The archaeological evidence suggests a more fluid and interactive religious environment. The shared burial spaces, mixed iconography, and evidence of mutual influence between different traditions paint a picture of a cosmopolitan society where religious boundaries were more permeable than previously thought. This underground ecumenism may have been possible precisely because it occurred away from the public eye, in spaces where practical concerns of burial and commemoration took precedence over theological differences. As we emerge from these mysterious depths and return to the world of the living, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of ancient Roman society. The catacombs remind us that history is not just the story of emperors and armies, but of ordinary people seeking meaning, community, and remembrance in the face of mortality. These underground cities represent one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in creating sacred space, transforming dark tunnels into galleries of art and memory that continue to inspire and mystify us nearly 2,000 years after their creation. From the silent chambers where the dead rest in eternal peace, we now prepare to enter a very different world, one of lavish gardens and marble halls where Rome's elite lived lives of unprecedented luxury and comfort. The contrast could not be more stark, from the humble loculi of slaves and freedmen to the palatial villas where wealthy Romans surrounded themselves with beauty and opulence built entirely on the labor and suffering of those who would never see such splendor themselves. That is a journey from the democracy of death to the hierarchy of life, from the underground world where all souls found equal rest to the surface world where every luxury was purchased with human bondage. In these magnificent villa complexes, we will discover how the wealthy few lived while the many suffered, and how the stark inequalities of Roman society played out in the most intimate spaces of daily life. Chapter 4. Inside a Roman Villa: How the Elite Lived While Slaves Suffered. As dawn breaks over the hills surrounding Rome, imagine yourself transported into a world of unimaginable luxury, where every comfort known to the ancient world has been gathered in one magnificent dwelling. As you stand at the entrance to a villa belonging to a wealthy patrician family, perhaps a successful merchant who has parlayed trade connections into senatorial rank, or a military commander enriched by conquest and the systematic exploitation of conquered peoples. The contrast with the slave quarters we visited earlier is so stark it seems as though you've entered an entirely different universe, a realm where human suffering has been alchemically transformed into unprecedented comfort and beauty. The villa itself sprawls across several acres, its architecture a testament to Roman engineering prowess and aesthetic refinement that represents the pinnacle of ancient luxury. As you approach the main entrance, your feet encounter the smooth, heated stones of the walkway. Beneath these stones runs a hypercourse system, a network of hollow spaces through which warm air circulates, maintaining comfortable temperatures even in winter's depths. This marvel of engineering extends throughout the house, ensuring that the elite need never experience the bone-deep cold that plagued their human property in the cramped slave quarters. The hypercourse system was considered proper and necessary by the wealthier merchant class for their villas throughout the Roman Empire, representing both technological sophistication and conspicuous consumption. The hypercourse represents one of humanity's first central heating systems, a complex engineering achievement that required constant slave labor to maintain. The floor was raised above the ground by pillars called pilae, made of brick, mortar, or concrete, usually about 2 feet high, so that hot air could circulate beneath. A furnace composed of a continuously burning fire would be built under one corner of the room, so the hot air would circulate under the floor, and inside flues built into the walls. The system required slave labor to fuel, monitor, and clean the furnace during the day, with workers feeding small twigs and branches into the flames. Operating a hypercourse was quite expensive, and only wealthy Romans could afford such a system in their homes. It required skilled engineering, as the hypercourse had to be waterproof and have no leaks, while maintenance and repair costs could be high. The entrance hall, or atrium, opens before you like a scene from a dream crafted by gods for their own pleasure. The ceiling soars overhead, supported by columns of imported marble, perhaps the pristine white stone of Carrara, or the rich green veining of marble from Egypt's distant quarries. Sunlight streams through the compluvium, an opening in the roof designed to collect rainwater in the central pool below. The sound of falling water creates a gentle, constant music that masks the noise of the bustling household staff and transforms the space into a sanctuary of tranquility. The atrium serves as both architectural marvel and stage for the complex social theatre of Roman elite life. But it's the human choreography that truly reveals the scale of elite Roman luxury and the profound dependence of masters on their human property. Everywhere you look, slaves move with practiced efficiency, each performing highly specialized tasks that together create an environment of seamless comfort for their masters. Slaves were employed in a range of domestic work in Roman households, doing the most menial work, cleaning the house, preparing food in the kitchen, weaving cloth, and dealing with animals in the stables. Near the entrance, nomenclators, slaves trained to memorize names and faces, prepare for the morning salutatio, when clients and petitioners will arrive to pay their respects and seek favors. These human databases possess encyclopedic knowledge of Roman social networks, their memories serving as living archives of political relationships and social obligations. The morning salutatio represents one of the most complex rituals of Roman elite life, requiring an army of specialized slaves to manage the intricate protocols that govern interactions between different classes of people. Porters, known as ostiarii, guard the household entrance and control access to the master, while other slaves prepare refreshments and manage the flow of visitors according to strict hierarchies of social status. The bedchamber slaves, or cubiculi, have already spent hours preparing their master for this public performance, attending to every detail of his appearance and dress. Follow the morning routine of the villa's master as he begins his day in a ritual that epitomizes the profound inequality of Roman society. He does not dress himself. That task falls to his cubiculi, personal attendants who have spent years learning his preferences and moods with the devotion of religious acolytes. The process of getting dressed is an elaborate ceremony involving multiple layers of clothing, each garment carefully selected and arranged according to social conventions that communicate messages about wealth, status, and political allegiance. The toga, that cumbersome symbol of Roman citizenship, requires the coordinated effort of several slaves to drape properly, its complex folds creating the precise image of dignified authority that Roman society demands. These personal body servants, often young and attractive individuals chosen specifically for their appearance, attend to their owner's most private needs, with an intimacy that reveals the complete absence of privacy for enslaved people. They help with bathing, dressing, and undressing. They sleep nearby to respond instantly to any summons, their lives so thoroughly absorbed into their master's routines that they have no independent existence whatsoever. Their humanity is erased in service to the comfort and convenience of those who own them, reducing complex human beings to living tools designed for a single purpose. While the master prepares for his public day, the kitchen slaves have been at work for hours preparing the morning meal with ingredients that represent the wealth and reach of the empire. The culine bustles with activity, as cooks and their assistants transform ingredients gathered from across the known world into a feast that would feed a small village. Egyptian dates, Spanish olives, wine from the Greek islands, spices from distant India, all flow into the villa's kitchens as tribute to Roman wealth and power. Each exotic ingredient represents not just trade networks but chains of human suffering that stretch across continents. From the slaves who harvested dates in Egyptian heat, to those who risked their lives diving for precious shells in distant waters. The kitchen itself is a marvel of organization and efficiency that rivals modern commercial operations. Multiple cooking fires burn simultaneously, each tended by specialists who understand exactly how different foods require different preparations. Smoke is drawn away through ingenious venting systems that keep the main house free from cooking odors, ensuring that the unpleasant realities of food preparation never intrude upon elite comfort. Fresh water flows constantly through lead pipes, another engineering wonder that brings the resources of distant mountains into this domestic paradise. The irony is stark. While slaves labor over fires in stifling heat, their masters enjoy cool, comfortable spaces just steps away. But perhaps most striking is the small army of specialists required to maintain this lifestyle. Each slave so narrowly focused that they perform only one specific function in the vast machinery of elite comfort. The Aquarius manages the complex water systems that bring fresh supplies to fountains, baths, and gardens, maintaining an intricate network of pipes, valves, and reservoirs that would challenge modern engineers. The Hortulanus tends elaborate gardens where exotic plants from every corner of the empire create a living showcase of Roman dominion, transforming nature itself into a display of wealth and power. Librari, educated slaves, often more literate than many free citizens, maintain vast collections of scrolls and assist with correspondence that spans the Mediterranean world. These slave intellectuals may speak multiple languages, understand complex philosophical concepts, and possess deep knowledge of literature and mathematics, yet their wisdom and education count for nothing in legal terms. The daily routine of elite Romans reveals the profound dependence of masters on their human property, a dependency so complete it approaches the absurd. There are slaves whose sole job is to help with bathing, others who exist only to manage particular types of clothing, and some who serve no purpose beyond providing conversation or entertainment. The morning salutation requires the constant presence of servants who announce visitors, serve refreshments, and manage the complex social protocols with the precision of choreographed dancers. Now, many slaves in the household are so specialized that they have become living embodiments of single functions, their humanity reduced to the performance of narrow, repetitive tasks. The Roman bath within the villa represents perhaps the pinnacle of ancient luxury, a space where the intersection of technology and human labor creates an experience that approaches the divine. Fed by the same hypercourse system that heats the floors, the private baths offer a sequence of experiences that transforms daily hygiene into elaborate ritual. The coldarium provides intense heat and steam that opens the pores and cleanses the body. The tepidarium offers moderate temperatures for relaxation and social conversation, and the frigidarium delivers cold shock that supposedly promotes health and vigor. Slaves attend to every aspect of the bathing process, regulating water temperatures with scientific precision, providing oils and scrapers for cleaning, and ensuring that fresh linens are always available in precisely the right quantities and textures. As the master of the house moves through his day, the contrast with slave life becomes ever more apparent and morally troubling. While slaves eat simple fare from wooden bowls, often standing or sitting on hard surfaces, the family dines on elaborate meals, served on fine pottery or even precious metal vessels. Roman banquets are not merely about sustenance, but represent complex social rituals, where the quality and presentation of dishes communicate messages about wealth, taste, and cultural sophistication. The food itself tells the story of empire and exploitation, each delicacy representing the coordinated labor of hundreds of people across vast distances. The triclinium, or dining room, exemplifies this intersection of luxury and human suffering in its most refined form. Guests recline on couches positioned around low tables, their comfort maintained by slaves who anticipate every need with supernatural prescience. Water for washing hands appears without being requested, as if summoned by invisible forces. Wine, mixed to each individual's preference, flows constantly from vessels that never seem to empty. Between courses, entertainers, often slaves trained in music, dance, or recitation, provide amusement while the diners engage in the intellectual conversations that mark them as cultured members of the elite. The irony is profound. Philosophical discussions about virtue and the good life take place while being served by human beings who possess no legal rights or personal autonomy. The complexity of Roman banquets reveals the extraordinary coordination required to maintain elite lifestyle. Peacocks from distant provinces, their feathers still iridescent, arrive at table as symbols of exotic wealth. Shellfish, transported live from coastal waters, represent logistical achievements that rival modern supply chains. Fruits preserved through techniques that require enormous labor investments make seasonal delicacies available year-round. Each dish represents not just culinary skill, but the systematic exploitation of human labor on an industrial scale. Slaves risk their lives diving for oysters in dangerous waters. Others spend their days caring for exotic animals destined for elite tables, and still others labor in elaborate preservation processes that transform the natural rhythms of seasons into displays of human dominance over nature. The villa's private quarters reveal even more intimate dependencies between masters and slaves. Relationships that blur the boundaries between service and violation. Female slaves face particular vulnerabilities in elite households that extend far beyond their regular duties. They may be required to provide sexual services to male family members or guests, their bodies viewed as another form of property available for their master's pleasure. Roman law offers them no protection against rape or abuse, and pregnancy resulting from such encounters creates complex situations where slave children may be raised alongside their half-siblings who happen to be born free. The legal and social implications of these relationships reveal the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Roman slavery, where human beings are simultaneously property and persons, objects and subjects. Houseborn slaves, known as vernae, occupied a particularly complex position in the household hierarchy. These offspring of slaves, or children born from relationships between masters and slaves, were often held in great affection by their owners. Children would become very attached to their nannies, and vernae were often great favorites who received better treatment than newly purchased slaves. Funerary evidence demonstrates this close relationship, with some masters including memorials to beloved slaves in their family tombs. Yet this affection was always conditional, always dependent on good behavior and useful service. Even the most liberal householder would be willing to punish their slaves if necessary, and the inferior position of the enslaved was constantly emphasized, no matter how highly regarded they were by their masters. The education system within wealthy Roman households further illustrates the complex and contradictory relationship between masters and slaves. Pedagogy, usually educated Greek slaves, tutor the children of the family, often possessing far more learning than their young charges or even their parents. And these slave teachers may speak multiple languages, understand complex philosophical concepts, and possess deep knowledge of literature and mathematics that would be the envy of free citizens. Yet, their wisdom and education count for nothing in legal terms. They remain property, subject to sale or punishment despite their intellectual accomplishments. The spectacle of learned slaves teaching free children creates profound contradictions that Roman society simply accepted as natural order. The economic machinery that supports villa life extends far beyond the immediate household, revealing the vast networks of exploitation that fund elite luxury. The wealthy Roman family typically owns vast agricultural estates, worked by hundreds of slaves, urban properties generating rental income from tenants who may themselves own slaves, and shares in trading ventures that span the Mediterranean and beyond. The villa itself serves as both a demonstration of wealth and a command center for managing these diverse interests, with accounting slaves maintaining complex records of income and expenditure that track everything from the cost of exotic spices to the productivity of different slave gangs on distant estates. Investment decisions that affect hundreds of lives are made over wine and conversation in luxurious surroundings, while the human consequences of those decisions play out in fields, mines, and workshops scattered across the empire. The abstraction of wealth from its human costs allows elite Romans to enjoy their luxury without confronting the suffering that makes it possible. Slaves become mere numbers in accounting ledgers, their individual humanity erased by the mathematics of profit and loss. The villa becomes a sanctuary not just from physical discomfort, but from moral reality, a space where the consequences of systematic exploitation can be forgotten in the pursuit of pleasure and refinement. The social life of the elite reveals perhaps the most striking contradictions in Roman slavery and the cognitive dissonance required to maintain the system. Wealthy Romans pride themselves on their philosophical sophistication, engaging in learned discussions about ethics, virtue, and the proper conduct of life. Yet these same conversations take place in rooms decorated with the products of slave labor, served by human beings who have no legal rights, and funded by economic systems built entirely on human bondage. The intellectual gymnastics required to reconcile philosophical ideals with practical reality create elaborate systems of justification that would be comical if they weren't so morally corrosive. Some Romans, influenced by Stoic philosophy, develop elaborate intellectual justifications for slavery, arguing that it represents a natural order where superior individuals guide and control their inferiors. They claim that slavery benefits both master and slave, providing the enslaved with protection and guidance while freeing the elite to pursue higher purposes. Others, particularly those influenced by certain Greek philosophical schools, express discomfort with the institution while continuing to benefit from it. They may treat their slaves with relative kindness while never questioning the fundamental structure that gives them ownership over other human beings. But few seriously question the fundamental structure of a society where human beings can be bought, sold, and owned like livestock. The rare voices that do challenge slavery are marginalized as impractical idealists whose ideas threaten the foundation of civilized society. The religious life of the villa also reflects these contradictions in ways that reveal the flexibility of human moral reasoning. Household shrines honor traditional Roman gods, but increasingly, exotic deities from across the empire find places in elite religious practices. Domestic religion becomes another way slaves are included and bound to their master's family, with enslaved people joining free members of the household in worshipping at the household shrine or lararium. This religious inclusion creates an illusion of family unity that masks the fundamental inequality of the relationship. Some wealthy Romans become followers of mystery religions that promise spiritual transformation and eternal salvation, seeking meaning and transcendence in secret rituals and esoteric knowledge. Yet these same spiritual seekers see no contradiction between their religious devotion and their ownership of human beings, compartmentalizing their spiritual and material lives in ways that preserve both their religious aspirations and their economic interests. As evening falls over the villa, the day's activities wind down through elaborate rituals of luxury that transform sunset into theater. Slaves light oil lamps throughout the house, their trained movements creating patterns of illumination that transform rooms into scenes of ethereal beauty. The choreography of lighting requires precise timing and spatial awareness, with different slaves responsible for different areas and types of illumination. Incense burns in holders crafted by skilled artisans, filling the air with fragrances gathered from the distant corners of the world. Each scent tells a story of trade routes and human labor, from the harvesting of frankincense in dangerous mountain regions to the processing of exotic spices in workshops where slaves labor in stifling heat. The master and his family retire to bedchambers, furnished with silk hangings imported from distant China, soft cushions stuffed with down from northern Europe, and every comfort that human ingenuity can devise. Outside their windows, gardens bloom with flowers chosen not for their practical value, but purely for their beauty and rarity. Fountains splash musically through the night, their water drawn from distant mountains and delivered through engineering marvels that represent the coordinated labor of thousands. The sound of flowing water masks the reality that this luxury depends on the systematic denial of basic human dignity to those who create and maintain it. Even in sleep, the elite are surrounded by the products of human suffering transformed into objects of beauty and comfort. But in the slave quarters, a different world settles into restless sleep that knows no luxury or comfort. The same people who created and maintained all this magnificence return to cramped, uncomfortable accommodations where they prepare to repeat the cycle again tomorrow. Houses in Pompeii have no discernible sleeping quarters for slaves, with kitchen slaves probably sleeping where they worked, as did stable slaves. Porters would have bedded down in the tiny cubicles they used to guard the household entrance. The contrast is so sharp it defies comprehension. Two entirely different modes of human existence existing side by side, the luxury of one depending entirely on the suffering of the other. That the proximity of these two worlds makes the inequality even more morally stark, with opulence and deprivation separated by mere walls and doorways. Even reasonable masters would not hesitate to discipline disobedient or unruly slaves, using methods that reveal the violence underlying all elite comfort. One Pompeian house was found to keep leg irons in a cupboard, and some villas often had special cells to punish unruly slaves. The instruments of torture and control are kept close at hand, reminders that the smooth functioning of elite society depends on the constant threat of violence. No matter how kind the household might appear, Roman slaves were still not regarded as fully human or equal to their masters. They were seen as human tools, who did not require privacy or their own space, their humanity systematically denied in service to elite comfort and convenience. This system of extreme inequality would persist for centuries, shaping Roman society so thoroughly that alternatives became almost unimaginable to those who benefited from it. The wealth and culture that we admire in ancient Rome, its architecture, literature, arts, and engineering, all rested on this foundation of human bondage like a beautiful flower growing from poisoned soil. The magnificent villas with their heated floors and flowing fountains, the elaborate gardens and marble columns, the libraries filled with scrolls and the bathhouses that rivaled modern spas, all of these achievements were built by hands that belonged to others, created by minds that were owned like livestock, maintained by people whose humanity was legally non-existent. Understanding this paradox helps us grasp not only the complexity of the ancient world, but also the long historical development that has led to our modern concepts of human rights and dignity. The Roman villa represents both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty, demonstrating how beauty and brutality can coexist in the same space, often in the same moment. The slaves who created these marvels were not simply victims, but human beings with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and aspirations that were systematically crushed in service to elite luxury. Their stories, largely unrecorded by history, echo still in the stones of ancient villas, in the intricate mosaics and frescoed walls, in the ingenious engineering that brought comfort to the few at the cost of misery for the many. The legacy of the Roman villa extends far beyond ancient history, influencing architecture, social organization, and concepts of luxury that persist to this day. Modern mansions and estates still follow patterns established in Roman villas, with their separation of public and private spaces, their integration of indoor and outdoor living, and their emphasis on comfort and display. Yet we rarely consider the human cost of such luxury, the ways in which extreme wealth, concentration requires the systematic exploitation of human labor. The Roman villa serves as a warning about the seductive power of luxury, and the ease with which moral compromise can be disguised as civilized refinement. The architectural sophistication of Roman villas should not blind us to their moral implications. The hypercore system that heated elite floors required constant slave labor and enormous fuel consumption, estimated at 1,114 tons of wood annually for a single installation. The beautiful gardens required armies of workers who had no right to enjoy their beauty. The elaborate water systems that brought fresh mountain water to villa fountains depended on engineering projects that consumed countless lives in their construction and maintenance. Every comfort, every luxury, every beautiful object represented human suffering, transformed into aesthetic pleasure for the privileged few. As we conclude our journey through the shadows and splendors of ancient Rome, we carry with us the voices of those who built an empire but never shared in its glory. We remember the nomenclators who memorized thousands of names, but were never allowed to speak their own, the cubiculidae who dressed their masters in silk while wearing rough wool themselves, the cooks who prepared exotic feasts while eating simple gruel, and the countless others whose humanity was sacrificed on the altar of elite comfort. Their stories remind us that human progress often comes at costs that are only visible when we look beyond the monuments to the people who created them, and that the price of extreme inequality is always paid in human suffering that no amount of beauty or sophistication can justify. The sobering reminder that emerges from our exploration of Roman villas is that luxury and brutality are not opposites, but often intimate companions, that the highest achievements of human civilization can coexist with the most systematic denial of human dignity. Understanding this paradox is essential for comprehending not only the ancient world but our own, as we grapple with questions of inequality, exploitation, and the true cost of the comfort and luxury that define modern elite life. The Roman villa stands as both inspiration and warning, a testament to human ingenuity and a memorial to human suffering, reminding us that the beauty we create and the comfort we enjoy must never come at the cost of others' humanity. Our journey through ancient Rome draws to a close as the Mediterranean night settles over a world that vanished nearly 2,000 years ago. We have walked in the sandals of slaves who built an empire with their bare hands, followed the desperate courage of Spartacus as he challenged the mightiest power of his age, descended into mysterious underground cities where the dead held secrets that still puzzle us today, and witnessed the breathtaking luxury that existed alongside unimaginable human suffering. The Rome we explored tonight was a civilization of stunning contradictions, a society that produced magnificent art, literature, and engineering, while resting entirely on the foundation of human bondage. The same hands that carved beautiful sculptures, also bore the scars of whips and chains. The same minds that created complex philosophical systems also devised justifications for treating human beings as property. Yet from these dark chapters in human history, we can draw insights that illuminate our own time. The courage of rebels like Spartacus reminds us that the human spirit's desire for freedom can never be completely extinguished, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against it. The mysterious catacombs speak to our eternal quest for meaning and community, even in the face of death and oppression, and perhaps most importantly, the stark contrasts between master and slave force us to confront uncomfortable questions about inequality, power, and the true costs of comfort and luxury. As you settle into sleep tonight, wrapped in freedoms that millions of ancient souls could never have imagined, let their stories carry you gently toward rest. The struggles and sufferings of the past need not disturb your peace, but they can deepen your appreciation for the simple liberties we so often take for granted. The right to choose where we go, what we do with our time, and how we shape our own destinies. The voices from ancient Rome grow quiet now, fading into the gentle rhythms of your breathing as history releases its hold and allows the present moment to embrace you. Sleep well, knowing that the long arc of human experience has brought us from those distant, difficult days to this moment of safety and rest. Sweet dreams.